Good afternoon and welcome everyone. What we'll do is we'll just wait another kind of 10-15 seconds just to allow any final people to kind of trickle in, and then we'll get started. Lovely. So, thank you all for attending this afternoon. Here to kind of talk about both kind of Poweron's DPC product, but also kind of AOVPN in general, the state of it in kind of Windows 11 now that we're kind of 18 months into Windows 11 and what that kind of looks like. And I'm joined today by the wonderful Richard Hicks from the US, and it is silly o'clock your time, isn't it?
It is very early, so if I sound less than cheerful or spirited, you'll know it is 6 a.m. here on the west coast of the United States. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
No worries.
And then I'm also joined by my colleague Damian Shiell, who's here to kind of give us a bit of a sneak peek later into some of the other services that we're offering or we're looking to offer around AOVPN.
Hi there, everyone. Nice to meet you for the first time.
And for those who don't know me, my name is Leo Darcy. I'm the Head of Identity and Access here at Poweron Platforms, and I'm also the lead developer of the DPC product. So, for today's agenda, we'll kind of talk through kind of what's new with V4 for DPC and kind of where we're looking to kind of take it moving forward. Then we're going to kind of give you guys a bit of a demo showing kind of DPC, AOVPN, and Intune working kind of in a fully Azure AD based platform. We'll then talk through kind of what AOVPN looks like from a Windows 11 perspective, especially now we've had a major bug fix just released last month that will be landing in to most people in the next couple of weeks. Then we'll do a sneak peek on our AOVPN reporting solution, and finally kind of close that off with an open Q&A kind of across everything. We'll can't guarantee that we'll have answers, but we can certainly give it a go. So please do use the Q&A functionality of this webinar, and we'll either kind of answer them in line where appropriate, or we'll kind of save them till the end, depending on what the questions are and things, and kind of answer them between us. So, what's new in DPC? Well, ultimately, the real big one for us is Windows 11 support. So while we were aiming to have kind of Windows 11 support kind of day one release of Windows 11, unfortunately there were some bugs that I'm sure many of you guys have now kind of encountered, where while Microsoft says that compatibility is 99.97 or something percent from an application perspective, unfortunately AOVPN is one of those areas that is that 0.3 that had issues. So ultimately, we ended up having to do kind of a major rewrite of the core profile management engine to kind of get round a lot of the shall we say, non-working APIs. So your patience is very much appreciated on that side, because it's been a lot of work to kind of get us back to where we were with Windows 10.
No question. Just for clarification for the audience, the bug that we were talking about was a bug that was introduced in Windows 11, and there was a bug with the enumeration of a WMI class that's rather critical to always on VPN and VPN in general. And the way this first appeared was that I was getting reports that some of my PowerShell tools that I use were not working. Specifically, I have a couple of tools one tool that removes an always on VPN connection, and it actually basically rips out the VPN connection by the roots through that WMI class. And ultimately what happened was, as I started debugging this and realized that here's the problem, it's not enumerating this class, but it was only in Windows 11, which was just introduced, and it wasn't a problem in Windows 10. And so I am not a developer by any stretch of the imagination. So I had some of my developer friends look at it and they said, oh yes, this definitely looks like a bug. So lo and behold, we did get it fixed, but it took a bit. And of course, there's a catch. I don't know if we want to talk about that a little bit later, Leo, but that's kind of the highlight on what that was.
Yeah. So ultimately, because of things like these catches, and we were struggling to kind of get realistic timeframes out of Microsoft on that release, and we actually ended up rather than waiting for the fix and being kind of beholden to Microsoft for that, DPC now actually completely excludes the use of that buggy interface. And uses alternative methods to kind of do what we needed that class to do. So the great thing from our perspective is that we can now offer full support across Windows 10, Windows 11, 21 H2 and 22 H2, and hopefully newer versions as they come out. There's obviously rumors of Windows 12 on the horizon now. And ultimately, we can bring. Well, we're now at kind of feature parity, which was a big kind of step for us, and it avoids some of the other bugs that are still in the product, or still in Windows 11 that they've not yet released fixes for. But one of the advantages of us kind of taking that holistic rebuild approach to the profile management engine is that we've actually managed to squash a couple of bugs and made things a bit more consistent as well, so that there is a net positive kind of across everyone from the Windows 10 side in through the Windows 11 side, which is really good.
Outstanding.
And so kind of this was while it is a big release, it is V4, it was very much a kind of getting back to a position where we could build off the top of. So V4.1 is very much in the works, and for those of you who check out Mr. Hicks's blog, you've always seen a preview of some of the stuff that we would like to add in relating to some of the new CSP options that have been finally documented by Microsoft.
Yes, and by the way, just a little bit of insight there. Those settings, those features have been around for a fair amount of time. It's just that getting Microsoft to actually publish the documentation was like pulling teeth. So we eventually got that done. And then, of course,
still
when
managed
they released,
to get it wrong, though.
Absolutely, and they still managed to get it wrong because if you look, it says it's like 21H1 is, or Windows 11 21H1 was all of those features were supported. And if you, by the way, if you're following along at home, you can go to directaccess.richardhicks.com. You can see that post there. But bottom line is that they got it published. They got the version release wrong, the supported version release wrong. It is two of these settings, preventing a user from disconnecting the always-on VPN connection, and also preventing access to the advanced settings in the VPN interface. You can actually disable users from touching those, disconnecting or touching advanced settings. Those are supported in Windows 11 22H2. The documentation on the website says 21H1 on Microsoft's website. And then, of course, they published a bunch of new settings that were really compelling, like being able to change interface metrics and so forth. But those are not actually supported in any current release of Windows. So it's a future release. If you want to test those, as I mentioned in the article, you can load the latest Windows 11 Insider build, the development channel specifically, and you'll find those features there. So they're coming, I'm hoping later this year, but in that case, it'll expose a few more options via the CSP, which is always helpful.
Yeah. So from a DPC perspective on that, we are in the next release, we are, which is obviously non-confirmed, so take everything we're saying here as a bit of a kind of grain of salt. We're aiming to have the disable advanced options edit button and the disable disconnect buttons in the product. That shouldn't be particularly hard to add in. The other features that are kind of in the not in a released version, we will aim to kind of bring those into the product as the next version of Windows kind of ships into kind of a fully formed OS. Most of those features we already actually support, things like the metrics options and that stuff through alternative means anyway. So there's a couple of things in there that we don't currently support, but what we will probably do is when the officially shipped version of the product ships and those interfaces work, we'll transition to using those because they are much more defined and supported from a Microsoft perspective, and quite frankly far easier to code for. And then over time,
sure.
As the old versions age out, we can remove the older ways of doing things from the product. But there's a couple of other features that we're currently evaluating, I should say. We're aiming to get into the next version of the product. We have proof of concepts of both of these. It's just really down to, can we get it working within a reasonable time frame and kind of battle test it and generally get it to a quality level where we're happy to have it go out onto tens of thousands of devices. And we believe that it's not going to cause people's problem, because we are very conscious that people use these tools for line of business stuff. There are, if things like DPC did go wrong, a lot of people would have very bad days. So we are very conscious about being relatively conservative about how we release things. It kind of out into general availability, but enough kind of waffle. So the two things that we're looking to do is allow the customization of the MTU size. So we've got a couple of customers where this is considered quite important for a couple of reasons. And then the other one that might be more interesting to a lot of people is have the ability to automatically trigger a profile refresh or update when a GP update has run. So at the moment, when you do GP update, that updates all the registry settings on the device, and then there is a separate timer that runs to enable for DPC to then run a refresh. What we're hoping to be able to do is actually we'll still have a triggering mechanism, so that if things don't work out the way that we want it to, there is still some level of refresh. But what we can do is, rather than having to wait for that timer to kind of tick down and run out, we can actually trigger that additional refresh automatically. So from a ETA perspective on that, we're hoping to get things out in kind of the 1 to 2 month time frame. As previously said, we are very much based on we do it on when we are happy from a quality bar perspective, and that does depend on both the implementation and also the kind of how long we've got from a development time perspective. But sooner rather than later, hopefully.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
So kind of moving on. So Windows 11 demo. So this is something that we've been asked quite a bit around, and we thought we'd combine it with some of the other new functionality that has kind of landed since the last time we did kind of a public webinar, and we do need to update our kind of public facing videos to kind of show some of this stuff off. But what we're going to be doing here is take a brand new Windows 11 22H2 fully patched VM. It is Azure AD only, so there's no domain joining. Obviously, that is not a requirement. It's just more of a you've kind of already seen all the videos, and you're probably already running it in your environments with domain join machines. So we're proving that while you can do that, there's also this other option if you wanted to move more towards an Azure AD only approach, but you still like the features and functionality of DPC. We can absolutely work with you where you are in terms of your cloud journey. And we're going to do all of the device management and configuration from Intune.
Fantastic. And by the way, this is probably one of the more exciting options, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with DPC itself. It just enables DPC to be used in a broader scope. When I was first introduced to DPC, I was impressed that it was a fantastic solution, but a little bit, a little bit sad that is really kind of a niche product, right? So it was for my customers that are using Active Directory. We're not going to use Intune at any point, in the immediate future. And so I thought, great, it's a nice little niche product, and it will work in those scenarios. But when Microsoft introduced support for custom ADMX templates in Intune, that's when the lights went on. I thought, well, all of these features and capabilities that PowerOn has built into this platform, we don't lose those when we go to Intune. And to be clear for the audience, much of what the features and capabilities of DPC provides, which is Active Directory Group Policy Management, it's way more than that. We have many advanced features and capabilities built into the product, and it really can streamline your deployment. So most of what we're doing, if not all of what we're doing in DPC, can be done in other ways. And in fact, we make heavy use of PowerShell scripting on premises, or if we're doing this in the cloud, we're using an Intune proactive remediation. But there's a lot of moving parts there. You have to implement a lot of additional functionality and features and take advantage of those things. If you can do this with DPC, it's one-stop shopping, and it makes it infinitely easier to manage. So that's what excites me about this solution the most.
Yeah, and ultimately, as you said, you could do all of this stuff yourself. What we've really tried to do is productize that and make it a plug and play solution rather than having to faff and get things
and ultimately
time to market,
exactly,
isn't it?
Absolutely. And ultimately, the selling point here for the customers is that you and I deploy this all day, every day, and have for many years. And so we know about all of these things because we've had to fix these problems. Administrators just now deploying always on VPN may never know of all the name resolution challenges they have if the interface metrics aren't set correctly, or what the problem is with trying to set VPN strategy yourself. All of the things that we've built in there are just, again, like we said, they can be done. It's just that, if you're new to this, you're never going to know that until you trip over those landmines. And so this gives you the ability to deploy always on VPN right from the outset, in a very solid and secure manner, for sure.
So from a Intune perspective, we're just in our lab environment here. And first off, there's obviously the DPC agent itself, which is there. So we've got the AOVPN Dynamic Profile Configurator. It's installed on 2 devices. It is just an MSI, so a bog standard. You just chuck it at Intune and say kind of next, fill in all your details, etc., and tell it where to point to. That's almost the simplest part of this entire thing, is getting the actual MSI and service installed onto the computers. And then from a device management, we've got a number of configuration profiles that we're going to be running. So for those of you who don't know, you can absolutely do things like all of your certificate management through Intune. This is nothing to do with DPC, but it's just kind of taking you through that whole end-to-end. I got a Azure AD box and I need to get it on my VPN. So what we've got here is we've got the trusted root, the issuing authority. They're just going in as trusted certificates onto the device. And then we've got a PKCS certificate for the device and for the user as well. So I'm showing the whole thing for both user and device. Generally, when you're talking about Azure AD based VPN or devices, you don't tend to need the device tunnel as much, because all of your pre-logon is kind of cloud internet focused anyway, and you'll have generally have got rid of things like logon scripts and file shares and things like that, or you'll be doing them at a user context level once the user tunnel is operational.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, domain join is a requirement for the device tunnel. So you can actually deploy the device tunnel to an Azure AD join device, but it will never launch automatically. So
yeah, so it will absolutely function.
You can deploy the profile. It's just not going to work as expected. And again, there's no point in it. So for native Azure AD join machines, we always just deploy the user tunnel because there's no point for the device tunnel.
So then we get on to the actual configuration of DPC. So you'll see over here, there's this new tab that you may have seen, and we've got the import ADMX. Now, there's a requirement from a importing perspective to just import the windows.admx as well. That's a known limitation of the current preview. From Microsoft, they're aiming to remove the need to import that as well, but that is as simple as going into here. You've got the Windows.admx is one of the ones that ships with the computer, so you can just go to see Windows, policy definitions, and then it's Windows.admx, and then there's the associated .adml there as well. And that's as hard it is to kind of do an import. It is worth noting that there is currently a limitation when it comes to doing an imported ADMX, where you can't upgrade a used profile or a used what they call a namespace. So while I've got version 4 here, you can't actually upgrade that to 4.1 when that comes out without removing all of the configuration on that you've deployed out, which is a bit of a nasty limitation at this point. There is a way around that, and that is that you can create an additional template which has just the different set of settings in, so that say we bring out the limited MTU size feature and you really want to deploy that out via Intune as well, we would create a special ADMX file that just has those new MTU settings in it, so that they kind of layer on top of each other. And if any customers do need to do that, then do talk to us and we can help you create those customized ADMXs. That isn't a great solution for anyone, because ultimately we've got to help you guys create those ADMXs, and there is also a limitation of you can only have 10 imported ADMXs live at any one time. Microsoft are aware of this issue. There is I believe that there is a plan to fix that, but there is no public-facing ETA on that at this time. So just be aware that if you do import into Intune and you start using that from a production perspective, you are kind of capped at the feature set of that deployment to start with.
Very good. Hey, quick question, Leo.
Sure.
Are you limited to importing only 10, or only 10 can be used at any one time?
I believe that it's on the import.
Got it. So this you would only be able to import 10, and if you wanted to add the 11th one, you'd be dead in the water.
Even though
you might only be
using status error.
Even if you didn't use any of them, right? So
yeah, I've not tested that, but I believe that the limitation is on the import side.
I see.
Now,
interesting.
From a differencing perspective, that's not necessarily the end of the world, because the additional settings tend to be additive and they tend to be nice to have rather than core functionality.
Right.
So you could say consolidate 3 or 4. Ultimately, from a DPC perspective, we're not releasing weekly or monthly. Ultimately, we are. There's a couple of times a year. So even if you did do the differencing on every single subversion where we add new features, the chances are that they will fix the Intune issue before you run out of space. But we can't
Good.
guarantee that, so we're just highlighting that to customers.
And-
Just be aware that they don't kind of end up down a
You bet.
a cul-de-sac.
You bet. And at the end of the day, this might be more problematic for customers who are using ADMX for other things, right? So
Yeah.
they may be trying to do other things and then want to add DPC to this, and now they're out of space, right? So that's just something important to mention.
Yeah. So just from a, oh, there we go. So if we look at the configuration, what I've done is I've split it into two profiles just so that we could have a theoretical set of hybrid joined machines that do have the device tunnel and a set of everyone that has only the user tunnel. You could, again, just run it as a single configuration profile as well if you wanted to. So if we go into the settings, we can see these are all the configuration settings that are configured. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you the data that is configured on each of those, but we can kind of go in here and have a look, and we can see there we've got the usual configuration of 10/8 is our internal network, and we're in disabling credential caching and things like that. But you can then navigate through very much like your on-prem group policies. It should all be pretty similar in terms of what that looks like. And then from a end client perspective, it's what you would I would hope to expect. Is you've got your Windows 11 machine with perfectly functional tunnel. That is all coming through. We're syncing that via the company portal, and but you can also tie all of those configuration profiles and things into your autopilot or any of those other kind of deployment and automation engines within Windows.
Fantastic. And like I said, one to drive that point home, the advantage here, of course, is ease of deployment, right? So there are many advanced features and capabilities in DPC, and then if you were to do this with Intune natively, you would probably have about 6 or 7 or 8, maybe even more Intune proactive remediations that you'd have to create in order to get this to work and to function as it does here. And so yeah, it's definitely a fantastic solution. I love the fact that Intune is supporting this, because it certainly makes my life as an implementer a lot easier for sure.
Absolutely. And one of the nice things, if you are still going down that hybrid domain join perspective and you still have some level of domain stuff, switching to Intune can be, or once they fix the whole being able to update this, my recommendation would still be to use Intune for the deployment. The number one reason for me is that it allows out of band updates, which means that in the worst case scenario where that VPN configuration is completely gone, or like you need, like the data center's gone and you need to update DNS on all the clients, all of that kind of stuff. All you need is that internet connection, rather than needing to have a working tunnel to then remediate the tunnel.
You bet.
So it does provide that nice little get out of jail free card.
That is a huge advantage over direct access, no question.
Lovely. On to AOVPN in Windows 11. So yeah, Richard, did you want to just mention kind of we kind of alluded to the fact that there was a well, we've got the one feature out. There's a big asterisk right next to that, isn't there?
Yes. You're talking about the changes to CSP, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So absolutely, Microsoft has introduced some new features and capabilities in the CSP, which allow you to do things like disable access to advanced properties, or disconnect, or prevent access to the disconnect button, which was a huge ask. Everybody's been asking for that since day one, because people blame the VPN for things. Even if you're in split tunnel, oh, my internet's slow, so I'm going to go disconnect the VPN. And that was causing a lot of problems, because when you check the or when you disconnect the VPN, if you remove the connect automatically button, then it's really not an always on VPN solution. And then of course users may not know how to get back. So being able to prevent them from doing that is going to be a huge thing. Microsoft introduced support for that in the CSP. They did publish documentation on that, as I'd mentioned before. But the documentation today, or I think it's today, I didn't look today, but recently is wrong. Certainly when it first came out, I've asked them to fix it. The documentation says that those features are all supported in Windows 11 21H1 or 21H2, excuse me. That's incorrect. Those features came out in 22H2. And then there was another block of settings that are also mislabeled as out in 21H2, and those are actually not in any supported version of Windows 11 today. Those are, as I'd mentioned previously today, those are in the in a future release, and those are available in preview in the Windows 11 development channel, Windows Insider build. So if you want to take a look at that, you certainly can.
So I suppose for me, it's a sign, or it's a good sign that Microsoft are actually continuing to invest in AOVPN and the configuration stuff. Because to be honest, one of the reasons why we started building DPC was that we made a judgment call that said Microsoft's kind of done with this. They've kind of chucked it out there. It's good. It's kind of good enough.
Good enough, yeah.
And why doesn't everyone move to the cloud? And we were seeing customers that were very much not in a position to do that.
Sure.
And so that's where we kind of started. But it's also nice to see that Microsoft haven't completely killed it.
Very good.
Like
You're absolutely
the way
right.
they've done direct access.
Absolutely, and I have a laundry list of things I'd like to see them expose for us. But if you'll remember from the early days of Always On VPN, there was no even user interface. There was no way to create using the VPN device configuration profile template in Intune. You couldn't create an Always On VPN. You had to do that through XML. So you had to, code your XML file, upload it to the specific OMA DM URI. And so eventually, they fix that. And so, they have some features, but it doesn't expose everything. And so you have to go to XML to do some stuff. And there's still some features that you are not exposed in XML. So you've got to manipulate the registry and INI files. And of course, all of those things can be done with, Intune and proactive remediation, but you can see where this is going. There's a lot of things you have to do. And one, and two, you have to know what to do and how to do them. And of course, DPC takes all of that pain away. You can just check the box. And by the way, DPC is secure and kind of follows implementation best practices by default. So if you go in and do the very minimum things, you're going to be infinitely better off than you would be, using some of the native tools from Microsoft. So that's good.
Yeah, we very much try to, or we originally designed the product around if I was to go in and put it in for a customer, what would I expect the configuration to be, and kind of built off of that, which was, so we very much try to take that secured by default within reason. For example, we don't automatically enable the custom cryptography, because for people who don't use that, then it would be an immediate breakage.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so from terms of bugs in Windows 11, so the most obvious one has been fixed, but it's only in 21H2, isn't it?
For which one? I'm sorry.
The bug with the WMI
that's correct.
bug.
That's correct. Yes. So the WMI bug that has been plaguing all of us who do work with Windows 11 and Always On VPN is now fixed in Windows 11 21H2. Inexplicably, it is not fixed in 22H2, according to Microsoft. Their words were, "We didn't ask for it." Ironically, as Leo and I were talking before we started the webinar, when we submitted this bug last year, there was no 22H2, so we couldn't have asked for it. But anyway, hopefully Microsoft pivots and gets that fixed soon. And hopefully it doesn't take another 6 or 9 months like the original fix did. So we're hoping to have that resolved. And so for those of you who are using some of my tools for that, like some of my PowerShell tools to do that, those will now work correctly. Things like remove-AOVPN connection, which, by the way, you can find in my GitHub repository. That's github.com/Richard Hicks. those tools will now work in Windows 11 21H1, but they will not work in 20. I keep messing that up. It'll work in 21H2. They will not work in 22H2 because that one still has the WMI bug, sadly. But thanks to Leo and his team, DPC now does work on Windows 11. Of course, they had to go drive quite a ways around the block to make that work. But thank you to Leo and the team for persevering on that and making sure that we can now support it.
And there's a couple of other issues that I believe are still, I've not fully validated that these issues still exist, but just to be aware of, and be interesting to kind of hear your input, Richard, if you've seen some of these. But it's if in Windows 11, if you set a remote address field on a traffic filter, that causes the whole of WMI to kind of break.
So I have not done a lot of work with traffic filters, just briefly. It's not a really common feature to use. And so I have very limited experience there. I don't think I've run into that bug specifically now.
Yeah, it's, because because we've got traffic filters within the product, we do have a series of kind of integration tests that run all of these types of features. So it's just to be aware of if people are using traffic filters, then they might come across some more WMI related issues on that side of things.
Good point. Good point.
Then there's, I believe, an issue where a device tunnel still doesn't believe or doesn't tell the or output correctly as a device tunnel from the WMI perspective. Now, for most users, that's probably irrelevant. They're probably just something to ignore. Obviously, for DPC, that was a bit more of a problem because we were needing to use that information, and it's just a bit of an FYI to people because that's the kind of thing you'll go around in circles for 30 minutes on or more. Why does my device tunnel say it's not a device tunnel, but it kind of looks like a device tunnel, but it's also kind of not?
Oh wow, that's crazy. I hadn't run across that one either. But you're obviously digging in a lot more deep with the APIs and things like that to program
I think it's just when if you enumerate a device tunnel, you've got the device tunnel tag of kind of true or false, and I believe that just comes back as false when it should be true, and it is true from a PBK perspective.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Hadn't encountered that one myself yet.
And then the final one that is kind of a bit of a gotcha, and it's still relevant to DPC, is that when you install a device tunnel on Windows 11, the first name that device tunnel is given is actually tattooed into the operating system somewhere. Which means that if you remove that, so you've got no tunnels on your OS at all, and you try and introduce a new device tunnel with a different name, it will always return back saying this device tunnel already exists.
Wow, interesting. Is there a way to determine what that was?
Not that I could find, and I have
really. So
really
Windows
looked.
So let me understand. So Windows says there was a device tunnel on here called foo, and now you're trying to put one in here called foobar, and it's not going to like that. But there's no way to say, well, what was the original one? Was it named foo? And there's no way to find that. Wow, that's crazy.
So the only way that I've tried resetting all kinds of stacks to get around it. The only thing that I found to work is to do a factory reset.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting.
So most organizations shouldn't have that problem in kind of the wider estate, but you may trip into that from a development, like as you're building things out.
Well, and I can see that could potentially be a problem for a customer who's migrating from their own self-managed always-on VPN to DPC, right? So they've changed the name. They've grown tired of having to deal with managing these things manually and write scripts and packages and things like that. And they say, okay, well, we're going to use DPC now. And now the device tunnel was called device tunnel. Now they want to call it device tunnel DPC. Boom, that's not going to work. But at least they would know what it was called. I guess my question is man, it would be brutal if you didn't know what it was called. So because if you did, then you could just abide by that naming convention and get past this bug. So.
Yeah. So DPC does manage that. Because it turns out what you can do is, it provided you use the original name to start with, it will allow
Right.
it to be accepted into the OS, and then there's actually a rename VPN tunnel
Oh yeah.
command.
Got it.
So what DPC actually does is it will track the first or if you use DPC to put the first tunnel in,
That's right.
it tracks that, and then if you change the name later, what it will do is it will always install with the old name and then call a rename to get it to the correct name.
And that's awesome. But those customers who have already installed a device tunnel on their own would have to be aware of that. So that's and I do have customers that are migrating from their own managed always on VPN implementations to DPC, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
And again, if that's documented, great. But if you don't know, like if you if you happen to be doing some testing on your laptop, and now I'm going to go ahead and manage it with DPC, and I forgot that I called it a different name because I was doing testing, and I called it several different names, and I don't even remember what they are now.
Oh yeah. It
Then
threw me for an absolute loop the first
there
few
is
times.
no way to go back and find that. Wow. But Windows is obviously smart enough to know you got the wrong name. You just can't seem to locate it. Fascinating.
Which is, very weird. There is a registry key that you can populate to kind of say the original one was this one, and then DPC will always kind of use that behind the scenes.
I see.
So that's all documented in the there's a Windows 11 support desk article on our website. If you need that, and ultimately if that needs to be kind of rolled out across the estate, then either you can use group policy registry settings, or what we could potentially do is add that in as an ADMX, which I should probably do thinking about it.
Good deal.
Lovely. So I think that's kind of the kind of where Windows 11. Oh, there was one thing you mentioned just before we started the call, wasn't there, around RAS servers?
Oh yes. So many folks are probably familiar if you do a lot of work with AOVPN VPN. So this would be especially important for device tunnel connections, and if you're using AOV2 for VPN, for user VPN connections, you're probably aware that there's an issue with Windows Server routing and remote access, or RAS, where those connections can live into perpetuity, right, or forever, even though the client has long since disconnected. Anyone who has a VPN server that's been up for any appreciable amount of time can probably go into the management console and find a whole bunch of long-lived AOV2 connections that are probably quite clearly not actual connections. And in fact, if you go into PowerShell and look for those SAs for those connections, they won't be there. So they're just kind of stale, they're like zombie connections that just get stale in Windows Server RAS. There's a couple of workarounds. The first workaround was restart the service, the remote access service. The problem with that, of course, is that kicks everybody off. So many of my customers said, well, that's a no-go. I do have some customers that just kick off a restart like nightly of the service, do it at 2 a.m. local time and figure, hey, if somebody's working then, well, they're going to get disrupted. So it bugs the night owls, but most people won't be affected. I have written a couple of scripts to remove stale connections and remove duplicate connections. Again, those are in my GitHub. That's github.com/Richard Hicks. The good news is that Microsoft has been aware of this, and they are releasing a fix for this imminently. So I think beginning next month, that security update is going to be, or it's going to be updated. The update will be available as a part of the security updates. So those updates are coming. So hopefully those of you who are struggling with many stale kind of zombie AOV2 connections on your RAS servers, support, help is coming. Hopefully that we can put that one to rest, and that'll make life a lot easier for everybody.
Thank you. And I think it was also quite interesting what you were saying was that the VPN features and function or fixes don't always make it into the patch notes.
That's correct. Yes, absolutely. So that's challenging. I have some contacts at Microsoft that I will I usually get this kind of advanced notification, or I'll be asking about it, or maybe it's a bug that my customer has had open, right? And so I know when the fix is coming, and then I know, oh, it's been released, and I go and I look, and it's like there's no mention of it in this article, and I'll push back and I'll say, hey, what's the story with this? And then of course I'll get oh yeah, the developer marked this as no documentation needed, or they didn't submit documentation. So at the end of the day, that can be challenging. But sometimes I can push back and get that done, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. So there are times, unfortunately, where you just have to take our word for it. Yes, we know the update is in this KB. Go ahead and install it. Even though it's not documented, it will fix this problem. So moral of the day, try to keep up to date on servers and workstations.
I was going to say it's a very good kind of public service announcement of just because it doesn't look like there's any fixes coming through. There's actually way more in there than they publicly admit to.
In the release notes, yes, apparently that is a thing where those are optional, I guess. And so some of the developers or some of the groups just opt not to do that. And, I guess that's their choice, but it does make it more difficult for us for sure.
Lovely. So I'd like to introduce my colleague Damian, who's going to do a bit of a quick run through on our new AOVPN reporting solution.
Right. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Okay.
We got you.
Should say the template app. Okay. So so really to introduce why this sort of came about was very much like DPC in one sense that it came out of necessity because of a lack of functionality that I certainly found when doing a lot of design sessions and engagements and deployments. When it came to the reporting, people said, is that it? And well, yeah, it is. And it can be difficult and clunky sometimes to understand that you've got to go to each of the servers, or you've got to have all the network firewall holes punched through to be able to get the whole, the servers to be able to be listed in one console. And then you've still got to go then and search through each of the servers. You've sort of got to know what you want before you have the information, which can be challenging. So what we've done is we've created a centralized solution which pulls the information from each of the servers. So like DPC, and it uses some of the framework as DPC. It runs on the client servers, the RAS servers, and it pushes up a couple of data sets, which I'll go into a sec, up to an Azure storage space, and then Power BI grabs that information out of the storage account, and then does what Power BI does best: take those figures and turn them into a modelistic data. So high level, it's relatively easy to get it up and running. We have a configuration script at the moment, which does for our build process. That's our infrastructure, and so that will set up the Azure infrastructure. So the storage account, the blob container, the actual table storage, and create the SAS tokens and throw that out into it. At some point that will become a little bit more polished, but that's the information that's generated and required. Then at that point, the agent is installed on one of the RAS servers to get the process started. So that goes in at that point and installs, and then will generate again, and with those SAS tokens from the infrastructure, plug those into the local group policy or the ADMX files that are generated. So if your RAS servers are domain join, you can do that. If they're work group, you can do that as well. And we plug those SAS tokens in there, and at that point, then it can start throwing up its data to Azure. And then the final bit of it is then the Power BI side of it. So as you saw from here, it will be a marketplace app at which you can then put it'll be a licensable product, which that will license you for however many servers within the estate, and that will then start drawing those details from there, and it will stack up that data. So I talked about a couple of data sets. So we've got the RAS reporting data, which is what is visible in the reporting services console, and also the RAS console as well. And this, what we've tried to give a view around. So we have that sort of green light. I come from an enterprise monitoring background many years ago, and that then gives the green ticks are good, red crosses are bad, that kind of very simplistic traffic light system with some key critical information on here. We've then got down here, we've got the concurrent connections, active connections, available connections, and then a sort of a hit list over the time of how much activity we've got going on at that time and place. But please remember, Power BI is not a monitoring dashboard, it is an analysis tool, so it will always be a snapshot in time, however much that that delta will effectively be. We've also got some subscription data statuses on this summary page, some client connection information and concurrent connections by server. This landing page is because of Mr. Hicks is telling me I was a little bit all over the place, which absolutely, when we first showed this to you, we took that and we sort of we tried to create that landing page which would give you enough information to just be able to get a snapshot, like, you know, like the Veeam coffee shop coffee morning report in Operations Manager back in the day. We then have server overview, and so then this just then goes into a little bit more around the server information specifically. So you'll see we've still got the same information over here, but then it will go into the SSL health status, the available connections, active connections. Don't know how long it took to get that one number come out. It was absolutely ridiculous. But then also total gigabytes. So we're then starting to look at data flow as well. Now these, I must stress, are sample figures. They're not representative real, so that's why they're all a little bit over the place. And also all our SSL certificates aren't expired and in bad condition. It's just I wanted it to show a different state than otherwise than green ticks. We can see then we can pull into the information at a glance as well. So CPU, RAM, reporting disk, reporting free space, OS, number of SSTP ports available, number of IKE TP ports available, and expiry, and also uptime as well. So, and again, some more of those connections from the first. We then start having a look at the VPN server configuration. Now, we're not massively happy with this. It's a bit busy at the moment, especially when there's a lot of servers in there. So I think that could do with some reorganization, maybe some streamlining of that. But that's where we are at the moment. Well, one of the nice things here, we can actually then select the data that we want. And that's one of the lovely things with Power BI. We're using that wonderful power over the data model that we have within Power BI, and to allow us to sort of drive that information. And because that is, it carries it over, which is really nice, you know. So it's from the performance perspective, we've got the CPU usage and the RAM and the hard drive, and which are the core fundamentals that we tend to want to look at. So that's one data set. That's the performance data set, which can run at whatever interval. We then have the RAS data, which is out of that reporting server reporting console. And you just can't get that, the graphical representation of connections over it. It's just a long list. And that's one of the things that can be more challenging when you're trying to drill down information. So we then also have, so at the moment we're just looking at VPN 02 and 3. We can then, if we want to just look at one server and then just a specific client, we can see when they've been connecting. So we can look at trend analysis or troubleshooting or investigating for us some other reason, logging on time, maybe logging off time, etc., etc. We then have another tab here, which is sort of a work in progress at the moment around client distribution, because we can gather some details from that. So really working on the validity and the usefulness of some of that data. So it will be very useful when we start getting feedback from real customers about what they specifically want to see, because obviously we've got a limited data set here, but we can start pulling out some ideas. But this is the page. It's the most uneventful, in terms of, yes, it's a table, guys, but what it allows us to do, so I've just looked at client 4 System Center Ninja, and because I'm only on 4, if I take that off now, I can see that this naughty client has been on 4 servers. So I can then have a look at each of the sessions for each day, and that then gives us the information. So what we try to do then, we down have the IPv address, and don't get excited, Richard, that's not a real IPv6 address. It sort of is, but it might not be. So right.
No worries, man. So, no worries.
And then we've got the other bits and pieces over here. I haven't picked a particularly good one. I want to see, let's see if I can choose another client. See if I can get some domain. There we go. All right, so some of these are made up names, but over here you'll see we've got resolved name, and that's one of the major things that's missing out of the connection details that you can grab from the reporting services report, all the RAS stuff is about the resolved name. We know what the IP was, but you'd have to go and look that IP up, you know, do a trace route or a DNS resolution or whatever to get that name, and that then comes back to us. It tells us the protocol and the port and gives it to us in friendly names. So we've got lookups going on to allow us to do that. And then the last tab is the data flow, and again that's a holistic. So what we're trying to do here is being able to provide a bird's eye view of your estate, then be able to drill down into it as well at a data. So I can then see client 1 on VPN 05, didn't have any data on that one, but across all of the servers we can see that they've only you know, had a bandwidth of you know, a couple of megs. That data would be incredibly useful then for forecasting traffic trends, or do we need to increase the server's capacity? Do we need to increase load balancer, etc., etc.? But yeah, that's a whistle-top store. I do appreciate that. Some of the things that are coming in, and again, Richard, don't get excited. What I'd like to be able to do is pull out the differences between some of the SSL and the Hicks certificates, especially when you're using SSTP for that. Yes. Server call support, IPv6 support, though you might only be the person that's running it, Rich.
I'm one of the few, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But certainly server core, certainly more certificate stuff, just a little bit more information, because it's there. It's just need to pull it out and make it manageable, because we don't want it to be too heavy. We want it to be relatively easy to consume. Bit more performance detail maybe at that point. Yeah. Even potentially, if we can get it all working down the line, even start looking at the NPS, because as we all know, AOVPN from a monitoring solution, when I used to have to monitor it with Ops Manager, it's not a single product, it's a collaboration of technologies. Right. So and really being able to come from this summary page and being able to drill down on the actual there to get to the specific information, that's where we want to be. But there we are. Sneak peek, first sneak peek to the world of AOVPN reports.
Outstanding. I'm excited, and I've been telling people about this, and it's been very well received. It is a sorely lacking feature of this product, in that Windows RAS is you know, unlike direct access, is basically unaware of any other servers. You could have 2 servers or 200 servers. They don't talk to each other. They don't know they exist. And that does cause problems for centralized reporting. When there is a lack of centralized reporting, the more VPN servers you have, the more VPN servers you have, the more difficult it becomes to manage these things. You know, I need to, you know, you end up having to, you know, do some PowerShell coding to run PowerShell commands across all the servers and collect that data in text form, and then you'll have to transform it yourself. This is nice because it's a one-up solution. You don't have to manage it. As you onboard new servers, you put the agent on, it'll push all of your data out there, and it's going to be fantastic. I have customers that have, I have many large enterprise customers that are really chomping at the bit for something like this. So I'm curious, do you have an ETA on, like public availability, maybe even first preview?
Watch this space.
All right, then, good enough. But yeah, I'm excited about it. It's going to be fantastic when it gets out there. So
we need to work with large data sets as well. So that's one of the things that we've done that in a private preview. So we've had to do a little bit, as with DPC, we've had to re-engineer some stuff. So
right on. And for me, the other showstopper is Server Core, because I do have a lot of customers that used Server Core at my behest, because I'm a huge Server Core fan. The IPv6 thing is probably not a showstopper. We can deal with that, so not a problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Damian. So just looking through some of these the questions with the literally kind of the last 2 minutes. Richard, have you seen the one at the top around using forced tunnel with an overlapping IP address space?
I have, and I'm perplexed by that one. So the question is, you have a user who's in a hotel who's getting an IP address from the same IPv4 class, in this case, as their on-premises network, right? So on-premises, they're using 10, and they're getting a 10 from the hotel. This is a pretty common question, and from a forced tunnel perspective, this shouldn't be an issue, I wouldn't expect, because forced tunneling, when you enable forced tunneling, when the VPN interface is active, all traffic flows over the VPN interface, and I don't believe by default that a local traffic is even allowed. So that's unusual. So the question is, can DPC fix this? My first question would be, I'm not sure why it's broken in the first place. So
yeah.
It's entirely possible. I don't know. You might have to do some testing with that. You can get an evaluation license and kick the tires on DPC anytime. So you could certainly test that. I don't use forced tunneling very often. It's exceedingly rare from my perspective. Most of my customers are using split tunnel. Yeah, and so I don't have a lot of experience to draw from on there. I can tell you from a split tunnel perspective, I've never seen any issues with that. It usually just resolves itself when you're trying to access local resources versus tunnel resources. But yeah, that's unusual. But just to answer your question, it's possible DPC could do something differently, but you'd have to test that and find out.
Just to answer, I've had issues with overlapping ranges on a forced tunnel.
Oh yeah,
very recently. Yeah,
very interesting. I'll have to do some testing on that. So I'm not. Again, I don't use forced tunnel, so I don't have a lot of experience to draw on there. I'll put that on my list of things to test. If I come up with something interesting, I'll probably write about it. So directaccess.richardhicks.com is where you might find some more information on that.
Is when it's directly masked and directly copied. If they're just within the same range, no problem. But when they've got the same definitions on there, then that can cause a problem.
I'll look into that for sure.
So that suggests to me that it's something to do with the routing table. So DPC directly doesn't do anything that you can't do outside of DPC. My first thought would be to have a look at things like the route metrics and the tunnel metrics to see whether you need to kind of force one to be higher or lower than the other one. But I'd be very interested to kind of hear if Richard, you do a bit of testing and kind of see what some of the outcomes are.
You're absolutely
stuff.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. This may be an interface metric issue. So Lars, if you take a look at that, you might want to try adjusting interface metrics just to see if perhaps that does something a little different. Make sure the VPN interface is lower than your Wi-Fi and Ethernet connections, and certainly the interface metrics, the tunnel interface metric is problematic for name resolution for sure, but it certainly could play a part here.
So appreciate that we're kind of going over time, but we've got a quick one from RM who's talking about if there's a kind of a network glitch, the user tunnel first or kind of reconnects properly, but the device tunnel tends to hang, and if there's any good ways round that. I think on a manual basis, I've just been using kind of rasphone.exe, and you can go in and you hit the hang up. There's probably not too much that we can do from a DPC side, just because we don't have any real native local UI.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some stuff in the long-term roadmap where we'd like to start doing more with monitoring of connections and maybe starting and stopping them, but that's very tentative at this point.
That is interesting and intriguing for sure. To add to that, Leo, what I would say there is if the device tunnel drops, my first question would be, who cares? If the user tunnel's up and the device tunnel drops, it really doesn't matter. What you really want is for that device tunnel to be up when the user's not logged on. I would say if the user tunnel's up, there's a momentary loss of connectivity. The user tunnel comes up, but the device tunnel doesn't. I wouldn't worry about it, because I don't think it's going to be impactful. It's certainly not going to disrupt operation because all the traffic's going to be flowing over the user tunnel anyway. With regard to that, though, especially if you're behind a load balancer, but even if you're not, you might want to try disabling like mobility or setting the network outage time to a very low value. Then in that scenario, that may yield some relief there as well.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining us. Appreciate we're slightly over time. For the questions that we've not responded to, I think that we'll do the same as we did last time and kind of respond offline. But yes, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Damian, for joining me.
Awesome.
And thanks everyone for coming.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Take care.
So, guys, take it.
Cheers.